on today's Story Beat.
Raymond Chandler said, if you want to write in Hollywood, make sure you're writing something that is yours, that no one can tell you to change, no one can tell you to fix. It's yours. And then write for money, write for fame, write for that, but make sure, and that thing that you're writing that is yours can be a poem, an essay, a nightmare, a play, but keep that so that you're connected to something, to yourself.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Michael Elias, is an award-winning writer, actor, and director who's written film, television, theater, and fiction. His new novel, You Can Go Home Now, is a timely and thoroughly entertaining psychological thriller featuring a female cop on the hunt for a killer while battling violent secrets of her own. I've read You Can Go Home Now and can tell you it's a deeply engaging mystery with a lot of heart. Michael is also the author of the novel The Last Conquistador. Born and raised in upstate New York, Michael moved to New York City after graduating from St. John's College in Annapolis to pursue a career in acting. He was a member of the Living Theater and acted at the Judson Poets Theatre, La Mama, and Caffé Chino. Michael then transitioned to Hollywood and with Frank Shaw wrote the screenplay for The Frisco Kid, starring Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford. With Eve Babitz, he wrote Envoyez les Violons, and then he began a long writing partnership with Rich Eustis. Together, they wrote the screenplays for Serial, Young Doctors in Love, and they created the popular sitcom Head of the Class for ABC, which was partially based on Michael's experience as a high school teacher in New York City. Michael also worked with Steve Martin, a collaboration that included material for Steve's comedy albums, network TV specials, and the screenplay for The Jerk. Michael wrote and directed Showtime's Lush Life with Forrest Whitaker and Jeff Goldblum, leading to a nomination for Best Director at the Cable Ace Awards. His semi-autobiographical play, The Catskill Sonata, about a small hotel in upstate New York, was directed by the legendary filmmaker Paul Mazursky. So for all those reasons and many more, it's my distinct privilege to welcome the writer, actor, and director Michael Elias to StoryBeat today. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, it's my great pleasure to have you join me. So let's go back in time a little bit. When did you first get the bug to be involved in the entertainment industry, to be an actor, to be a writer? When did that first happen for you? As a young boy?
I love to tell stories, make up stories, as long as I can remember. So that was about writing. About acting, I didn't have good teeth in those days. And I noticed movie stars, actors, they had really good teeth. And I said, maybe if you become an actor, they give you good teeth. So I think that was semi-serious. That was, but I grew up in the Catskills and as a kid, and I watched all these comedians perform at hotels where I was working. And I loved it. I loved that they made people laugh. And I said, I think I want to do that. I'll tell you a story. You know, this is the thing that changed my life story. My father took me to see Coriolanus with Robert Ryan.
Wow.
At the Phoenix Theater. This must have been in the 50s, and I must have been 13 or 14 years old. And I had never seen a live movie star before. And he was, so there weren't a lot of people in the theater. So I ran down to the first row and sat there, and I just must have stared at him the whole performance. And at one point, right in the middle of a monologue, he looked down at me and he winked. And I said, I think this is what I want to do.
You want to wink at people from stage?
Yeah, I want to wink at. I want to be a movie star and wink at people. And then I got the acting bug kind of in college because we did plays. We did Brecht, Galileo. We did we did Beckett, Endgame.
Did you do Waiting for Godot?
Yeah. So I said, I think I really like this, but I don't know, how can I take this seriously? So I applied to law schools, and I also applied to Yale. And I went to my interview at Yale, and they said, yeah, it looks like you might be able to come here. And I said, great. And then on my way back to the train station or walking through the campus, I said, I'll go into the theater department. And I said, I'd like to apply to the theater department. And they said, okay, but you can't apply to 2 graduate schools in the same university. Which is it going to be? So I said, theater. And of course, I withdrew my application from the law school, and I was rejected by the theater department.
Best laid plans of mice and men.
But there I was. So I know. And I was accepted at, I think, University of Pennsylvania Law School. I must have been a pretty smart kid. Anyway, and I never showed up. I think they sent me a key to my room, but I never showed up. And I went to New York, and I said, I'm going to be an actor. And in those days, it's now too, of course, you supported yourself by, in New York, you could be a waiter, you could drive a cab, or you could be a substitute teacher and I did that, which came in handy later when we did head of the class.
Sure it would. So when you were acting, did you think of being a writer at the same time, or did that come later?
No, that came later. And I'll tell you that, as you mentioned, we had this comedy act, Frank Shaw and I, we were comedians. And it was kind of like a parallel career to being an unpaid actor in off Broadway, except for the Living Theater. I did get paid in the Living Theater. I got $15 a week. But of course, so I had to work as a teacher. But we became comedians, and we got a kind of modest fame or success, and we were on the Johnny Carson show a few times. In New York. And one night or one day afterwards, a producer called from Hollywood and said, who writes your material? And we said, we do. He said, oh, would you like to come to Hollywood and be comedy writers on my next show? I said, yeah. What about the act? And he said, not interested. And so that was it. We gave up the act and became writers.
And so what show was that?
It was a weird little show starring Dean Jones from Herbie. Remember Dean Jones? He was a Disney hero.
Herbie the Love Bug.
That's right. And so it was a half hour little variety show. It was a show always in search of a format. And but the guys who produced it, Ilson and Chambers, Ernie Chambers and Saul Ilson, they were great, and that was our first job. And I remember the secretary showing us to a room, said, this is your office. I said, okay. And they said, how many typewriters would you like? I said, how many? I don't know, 2. Neither of us really typed, but okay. And they brought in 2 big Selectrics, IBM Selectrics. And we worked. And then it was a question of just sort of going from show to show. After that, I don't know, I think we did Glenn Campbell and Leslie Uggams, but we knew always that Hollywood is kind of Darwinian. If you limit yourself to one genre, as it was, and that genre goes away, as variety shows did, you better be able to do something else. And in a sense, the same thing happened to sitcoms. You could be a sitcom writer, but all of a sudden, Archie Bunker appeared, and you had to be able to write character and maybe politics too. And if you couldn't do that, you were left behind. So that changed. And then, you had Mary Tyler Moore, and you had, as I said, the whole Norman Lear thing. And at the same time, we also wanted to write a movie, and we had this idea about a young, dogmatic, uneducated rabbi. When I say uneducated, I mean he was learned, but he wasn't of the modern world or whatever it was in the 1850s, making his way across America and becoming an Americanized rabbi. And that was, and we wrote that. And
so you had little to no training as a writer.
No. I mean, I wrote in high school. I wrote short stories.
But you didn't go to school for it. You didn't have formal training.
I don't think I ever took a writing class in my life.
So what lessons did you learn from those first group of people that stayed with you in your writing career throughout? Was there anything that they taught you?
Oh, yeah. I had mentors, tutors, and wise men and women all the time around me, working with them. I mean, for instance, if you were in a writer's room, when I started, it could also be brutal. You could have guys say, who hired these guys? Or you could have guys say, you know what, that's really good. What you need is to do this. What you need is to do that. Cut this. You would write a sketch. You go into the producer's office. He would read the sketch and start making notes. And he would say, get rid of the first page, or you don't need this, you don't need that, or you do need it, whatever it was. And that's how you learned it. It was a skill, but I didn't learn it in the classroom. I learned it in the school of hard knocks. And my best teacher was a guy, Ed Weinberger, who did Cosby, you know?
Yes.
Just being in the room with him and writing with him, that was a terrific education. And a guy named Bob Garland, who was such a talented writer. We wrote a screenplay together, which was made. It was called Trick Baby, or The Big Con, but we hated it so much we took our names off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you keep your name on, you put a pseudonym on, so you can get residuals, but you take your real name. You know that's
sure. So did it go through a big rewriting process or did you just not like what the movie was to begin with?
No, it went through a rewriting process. It was one day, you would take your script, your screenplay, and you would go to a professional typist, and it was Barbara's place. So one day, either Garland or I took a script to Barbara's place, and she said, "Oh, I just read the last draft of your screenplay." What? She said, "Yeah, so-and-so, the producer brought it in." I said, "And we didn't write any new draft." She said, "Well, I read it, you know." So we went to his office, and it was one of those, it's like right out of the movies. You can't go in there, he's busy. We barged in, and Garland was a volatile character. Garland says, "Where's the new script?" And the guy picks up a script, puts it to his chest, and said, "There isn't one." Well, it was what they called it. Was parts of his office were destroyed, and we went out with the script and we read it, and it was just it wasn't what we had written. So, but it was enough of what we had written, but it wasn't true to the book by Iceberg Slim, who wrote Pimp and Trick Baby and others. He's a great black writer. Anyway.
How important would you say it was that you started as an actor toward becoming a writer? How important was your acting knowledge and training in terms of writing? Was it helpful? Was it useful?
Yes, because, well, it depended on the acting class. If you went to Lee Strasberg, it wasn't useful because he was psychological. If you went to Peggy Fury or Gene Feist or Bill Hickey or Uta Hagen, it was also about, as they would say, the text. It was about what made a play and how were you as an actor in the service of this play? How do you tell the story of the play, not the story of what happened to you when you were 5 years old and you remembered something that your mother did to you and blah, blah, blah. That's what I say. So being in acting class, and I took acting, when I came to Hollywood, and I was a writer and then a producer and a director, I continued to go to acting classes because, especially Peggy Fury, because I learned so much about writing from doing scenes from the great playwrights.
That is one of the great ways to educate yourself if you're not formally educated. And even then, it's a great way to educate yourself, is to just read plays and screenplays and so on. Now, you wrote screenplays and teleplays for many years, but you're now a published novelist, as well, as we mentioned in the opening, and a mystery writer, no less, a thriller writer. So tell the listeners the basic story of You Can Go Home Now so that they know what it is.
It's a woman from upstate New York, like myself, who was, when she was 16 years old, her father, who is a Planned Parenthood doctor, abortion provider, was assassinated by an anti-abortion terrorist. In front of her, the guy shot him through the window in front of her brother and mother, and they were all having dinner. She becomes a cop to find this guy. And since the novel is about revenge, she intends to kill him when she finds him. And she becomes a cop so that she can better find him. At the same time, she's working in Queens, and there's a series of cold case murders that she's handed. A bunch of men found murdered in various mysterious ways. And one thing they have in common is that all their widows had the same alibi at the time these men were murdered, and they were in a battered women's shelter. So she goes underground into the shelter to find out if there's some connection between this shelter and the men who have been murdered. And these men were abusive husbands and so forth. At the same time, she comes closer to finding out who killed her father, and the two stories come together.
So you're obviously best known, I think, for having written a lot of comedy. How did you get to finally writing drama like this? This is truly dramatic, and there's little to no comedy in the book. How did that happen?
Yes, I'm glad you didn't use the word serious as opposed to comic, but dramatic. That's good. I think there's some comedy in the book because she's a wise ass and she's a sarcastic, bitter, angry person, so that sometimes she can be funny. However, I think, I hate to use the word grow out of or matured from comedy to more dramatic, maybe meaningful, maybe political, whatever you want to call it.
Less fluff,
I suppose. And I think it just, I wasn't interested in it anymore. I have interests. So I say one of my interests is Inca culture and history.
Really?
Yeah, I got interested in it, and what happened was I went there. I went to Peru, and I came back. I was completely ignorant. I didn't know an Aztec from a Mayan to an Inca. I didn't know anything. And I went, but I loved it. And when I came back, I started to read books to find out where I had been. And then I let my imagination go and said, okay, a lost city of the Incas, still alive, maybe kidnapping children for sacrifice. Blah, and so forth. That's kind of the plot of, it's Michael Crichtonish. That's the plot of the Last Conquistador. And I got really interested in that. So there's no comedy in that, but there is a lot of drama. And it was very exciting for me to be in that world. Another world that really interested me is science fiction. I found this science fiction novel by Robert Silverberg called The Man in the Maze, and I adapted it, and I had a great time doing that. And then I got really interested in, probably because of that, my father taking me to see Coriolanus, and also he took me to see Tamburlaine. I got really interested in Marlowe, actually more Marlowe than Shakespeare. Then I read Anthony Burgess's novel about Christopher Marlowe, and I adapted that. And I'm still trying to set it up as a series and whatever. So,
did you need to obtain rights to do any of those adaptations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I had to option them, and we can talk about how you do that and why you do it and why it's necessary, if you like, if people want to.
I think it's a very important point to talk about, because it's not every day that you can just take any book, if it's not in the public domain, and adapt it. You can do it, but you can't sell it.
Yeah, I had a friend who said, I'm going to write a sequel to The Great Gatsby. And he did. He wrote a sequel, but he forgot to ask the estate to get their permission. And
I think it's now lapsed into the public domain.
It may be, but he's dead, so it's too late. The other thing is, if you see a book, and that's a great way to either, pardon the expression, get into the business or find out But adapting a novel is a very exciting thing. It's not easy, even though you think, oh, the characters are there, the plot is there. But the first thing you do is you have to find out if somebody else has optioned it or owns it, because there's no point. So, or if it's, as you say, in the public domain. So you call or write to the publisher and say, are the rights of it, and they all have these rights department, are the rights available to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? And they say, yes, they are. Or they say, no, somebody owns it.
It's very much in the public domain. Anybody can get that one.
But anyway, that's what you're going to, now you say you option a book that isn't in the public domain. You say, okay, I'm going to write a screenplay of this novel. And I now, by paying an option, I own this novel for a year. But you have to ask yourself, can I write a screenplay within that period of time? And can I try to sell it within that period of time? And the answer is no. It's really hard. So what you have to do is say, I want to option this novel for a year, but I want an extension for a second year if I pay another $500 or $1,000 or what it is, because what if it takes you 6 months to write the screenplay? Now you only have 6 months to sell it, try to set it up.
What is it that you're looking for in the novel to determine whether it's viable as a movie, as a screenplay? What is talking to you and saying, hey, this will work as a movie?
It's a very good question. One of the things you don't want it to be is an interior monologue of a guy who's deciding whether to jump off a building or not. You want him, does it have elements in it that can be visual? Does it have elements in it that are also entertaining? And also the story can be told through action and visualize scenes where actors can be in them. And does it have a good lead? So you can attract a star or a director.
So you can go home now, clearly could be made into a movie. It's
Yes.
set up to be made into a movie. Have you adapted your own book?
No, it was optioned by Sony. The producer optioned it through Sony, and it's making the rounds of streamers. For The Last Conquistador, there is a screenplay.
That you wrote or someone else wrote?
I wrote.
And have you tried to sell that as well? I assume you have.
Yes. I'm always trying to sell.
Well, it's never easy to sell a screenplay, is it?
No, I had lunch today with a fellow who's written a lot of movies, and it's really hard. It's harder than ever. In a way, it's like the First World War. Nobody knows how it started. And that's kind of like it is. Then is it because a director liked it? Is it because a star liked it? Is it because a studio executive liked it? And a star can like it, a director can like it, and a studio executive could say, "No, I don't like it," and or whatever. Any combination of these, they're delicate. And I mean, this science fiction movie that I was trying to set up, I sold it. I sold it to Mel Gibson.
Wow.
Yeah. The good Mel Gibson 30 years ago. And
The good Mel Gibson.
he was about to commit to it. And this script came in, or somebody called him and said, Mel, I have a script called
Lethal Weapon?
Lethal Weapon. That's what it was.
Well, and that turned into a very large franchise.
You bet.
So you consider yourself to be a deep researcher? Do you really? So I can't imagine that you know a lot about women's shelters. I assume you had to do some research on that, yes?
Yeah. The problem about women's shelters is you can't go in one. You know, they're not letting men in. And this, I wrote this a few years ago. So, but there was a lot of stuff I could read. I could read accounts, and I also could read about the anti-abortion terrorist movement through the Southern Poverty Law Center, there are a lot of places, and research on what it's like to be a cop. I found a name, or somebody gave me a name of the detective in Queens. And I said, I'm writing a novel about a Queens detective. And he said, you know what? Just make it up, man, because it's probably true. And of course, the other thing today is Google. So as you may have noticed, when she goes to a place, I mean, I've had people say to me, you must have grown up in Queens. You hit all those spots. How did you know that diner and that Indian restaurant? And so because I looked it up on Google, and I would look up the menu and say, okay, she ate this and she ate that, and what streets there were, all it.
So in the old days, you wouldn't have been able to do that at all. You'd have to go to New York and figure it out, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend, Nick Meyer, the guy who
the 7% Solution.
Yeah. So he just, he's got another novel, Sherlock Holmes novel. He says, I'm going to Mexico. I have to do some research on something. I said, why? I mean, it's great to go to Mexico, but he says, well, I want to go see it. Okay. And Last Conquistador, I had scenes that took place in the American Embassy in Lima. I went on Google and I got pictures of the American Embassy in Lima and inside. So
both a screenplay and a novel are two very different forms, but share many similarities. They have characters, there's a plot, etc. Both are challenging to write. Forget about the business part of it, the sales part, but just the actual act of writing either a screenplay or a novel is time consuming and not necessarily an easy act to do. What for you are the bigger challenges? Is it coming up with plot? Is it character? What are the challenges that you have to overcome when you start something?
I think you can't overcome the challenges. And the challenges, what you're doing is you're marrying the challenges. And you live with them till you finish. And every blank page is a challenge. Every new character is a challenge. And you either say, you know what, challenges are kind of fun. I mean, in one sense, another definition of writing is called solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
Why writing is hard, as I'm sure you know, is you have to create the problems and then solve them elegantly for the entertainment, amusement of the reader.
Sure.
The other thing is we are told from the time we were infants, oh, you made that? That's so good, right? Well, if you're writing by yourself and you start saying, oh, I made that, isn't that good? No, you have to become schizophrenic and say, I made it, but it's no good, or I can fix it, or I can make it better. And that's something that separates writers from, would-be writers, because the rewriting is what makes it good. But if you say, hey, I made this, it's got to, and step back and say it's good. No, that's the thing. So the challenges, you live with the challenges and either say, I kind of enjoy it, or I don't. If you don't really, then I wouldn't be a writer.
You're saying that you should embrace the challenges.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent, because if you don't, you're not going to become a writer, because it's too hard to do it sitting in a room alone with no feedback, like you just said, and until you get that feedback. And what happens every time a screenwriter gets feedback? It's almost always negative. So you go back to the drawing board and figure things out again. So how many screenplays have you written and nobody touched a single word or gave you any notes? I would think none. None. Yeah, that's exactly right. What is your technique or method for developing characters?
History. I don't think I'm really good at psychology or inner motivation. I like to say, this is the story of this person, and that affects what they do and how they act and behave. I'm not. And some writers are really good at it, self-reflection. I'm not. I'm actually a very superficial person, and in a sense, my characters tend to be sometimes too, but they are defined. I can make them be really interesting by the stuff that they do, not so much the stuff that they think. And
well, the superficial characters are perfect for the sitcom world and comedy world, because most of the characters throughout the history of comedy tend to be superficial.
Yeah, so that was my training. But I would say in a movie, for instance, in a film, if you say, okay, what's the difference between a novel and a screenplay? In a screenplay, you can't say what the characters are thinking. And if you read, unless they say, I hate you, whatever it is, but you have to show it. You can't tell it. You have to have them demonstrate through action, jealousy, rage, passion, all that stuff. So, for some reason, or not for some reason, but I like that.
Well, we only in screenplays deal with two senses, sight and sound. So you can't, like you say, you can't tell us what's going on in a character's mind unless they show it to you or tell it to you.
In the Frisco Kid, Gene Wilder, at one point, he was improvising like crazy, or a lot. And at one point, there's a scene with Harrison Ford, and he gets really angry, and he says, "I can't stand you. I don't want to be around you anymore. I don't like you. I didn't write that." He put that in. But the thing is, that was an actor talking. That wasn't a writer. That's the problem with improvisation, because actors love to tell you how they feel, but feelings don't advance a story.
That's for sure.
So he can sit there for the next half hour and say, "I don't like you. I think you're a terrible person. I hate you." And then nothing happens.
Are you pretty good at figuring out, you must be, at plot or structure, because without it, you really don't have much of a great story to hang your hat on?
I would say so. And by the way, I also have one other. There are movies that contradict everything that I've said.
Well, of course.
So, and they're great ones, but for what I'm able to do is within those boundaries. And this is not, so I'm saying these are not rules, because it's a cliche, go break the rules. But for me, this is what works. This is what structure. These are my, what did I say? My boundaries, in a way.
The parameters.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I like to have, and I certainly used it in Last Conquistador, and I'm using it in my next novel, is science fiction, in a sense. So the idea that my character, Adam, I think his name is, in The Last Conquistador, may be a distant relation to Pizarro, who was a scourge of the Inca, so that when he walks into a room full of Peruvian natives, they can smell him and smell the evil that is in his genealogy.
They can literally smell it?
Yes, and then sometimes the character, and even though he's the hero and he's Hispanic, he's got that, he's cursed in a way. And in the end, the Incas take their revenge on him. So, and I also like a lot, kind of spirituality in this. So that's
well, that gives it real depth. How long did it take you to write each of your books?
Well, The Last Conquistador, I don't know, that probably took me a year and a half. The You Can Go Home Now longer, because it started and then was abandoned. It was originally about the son of the doctor, and who ends up and he finds himself, he's homeless, he's on the street, and he is adopted by this kind of mystical guy and turned into an instrument of revenge. But that became too comic booky for me, and I wanted to go back to something real, so I made it about the daughter. So I would say that took me about 3 years.
And are you a heavy rewriter?
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes people say, well, if somebody says, "Oh, I'd like to read that screenplay, send it to me," I attach it, and I say, let me just take one more look at it. And I end up not rewriting it, but I say,
polishing. You do polish passes.
I do polish and then put it back. So yeah, I'm an inveterate rewriter.
And me too. I don't really care for the writing process. I like the rewriting process. That's what I like.
Yeah, that's why I say, whether it's advice or something, but the thing is, finish it, and then the real work begins. But it's a different kind of work. It's luxury to be able to say, how do I improve this, not how do I create this?
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's, for me, that's where the heart of the art is in the rewriting process. Because like you say, you've written a draft, and the draft has probably got myriad problems in it. And so now you got to spend time refining it, making it great.
As I write, or when I'm writing novels or whatever it is, I have readers. You Can Go Home Now, which is about where the voice is a woman. I gave this book to women, and they kicked my ass, a lot of them. No, she wouldn't say that. No, she wouldn't wear that. No, that's sexist. No, that's whatever. And I got a lot of great advice.
You like the feedback.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think you can do it without the feedback. That's very challenging to do when you're, again, writing alone in a room. When you were writing with partners, various partners, you had that kind of immediacy. You had feedback from your partner. But when you're writing a novel by yourself, you have no feedback until you give it to somebody.
Yeah, or you have what I call, again, the schizophrenic, where you have to become, I made it, but I can make it better, because it's not good enough. And some people can't do that. What
would you say are a few of the things that have helped you to get the book published? What must a writer do to secure a chance at publication? Aside from writing a great book, I mean, that's obvious, but is there anything that you, process-wise, that you went through and that helped you to secure publication?
Well, I have to say, and I had a friend who was an agent, a book agent. And also I wasn't a beginner. So
that helps.
It did help. And the Last Conquistador, I gave it to him, and he said, yeah, I liked it. I said, Ed, can you read? Would you read? He's a friend, but he was also a literary agent. Then he died after the book came out. And then my next book, You Can Go Home Now, he wasn't around to help me. And I was in Paris, and I kind of had an English agent who was a friend too. And she said, I don't think I can sell this book. Meanwhile, while I was in Paris, I had given it to a friend who gave it to his French agent, who read it and said, I can get you a French deal on this. And I said, great. Then I called up the English agent and said, does it mean anything? I got a French publisher for this. She said, let me read it again. And she did. And then she said, I think we can go to HarperCollins. And by the way, I just made it under the wire, is that the expression, because I was a male writing a female character, and forget it now. It's just too hard. And if I write another novel with a female character, I'm going to put a pseudonym on it, because otherwise you don't have a chance.
You don't think a man can sell a book with a female protagonist?
Not now.
Only male protagonists for a male writer. Is that also true for the reverse, where only female writers can write female characters, but they can't write male characters?
They can write anything they want. They can, and write them well. I mean, there's male writers can write females, and female writers can write males. That's not the equation. The equation is, can you get published? Can you publish a book about a woman in a woman's voice if you are a male writer? And I think it's pretty tough. It's not impossible, but it's pretty tough.
And that's just a sign of the times, yes?
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's okay. I'm not going to get all upset about it. And but I mean, I looked at the Los Angeles Times book review bestsellers. 9 out of the 10 are written by women. And by the way, women are the ones who buy books, right?
That's true. The women are more the book buyers than men. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I don't know any men's book clubs. Do you? But I
do not.
But I know a lot of women's book clubs. So why not?
That's the audience. So you're saying, think like a marketer and go for where the market is.
Yeah. And if I write a muscular, Lee Child kind of thriller, I'm going to write a male character, because this is an editor at HarperCollins told me this. You got just squeaked by another week and you would have been dead.
I want to talk for a short while about comedy, since you wrote so much of it. The old line, of course, is dying is easy, comedy is hard. I know it's almost impossible to define, but can you comment on what makes comedy so difficult to do well?
Well, comedy demands instant approval. There's that 5-second thing where then you go, oh, and you start to laugh. But normally you laugh at comedy. It demands and gets a physical reaction. And if it doesn't, it's not funny.
It's not a comedy.
Not a comedy. So it's really easy to say, what, and I think what makes people laugh changes sometimes. What makes people laugh. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do. And also maybe do we laugh more or less? I don't know. When you look at movies, contemporary comedies, do you find them as funny as you found comedies that you saw as a kid? Or is it because you were an easier lay in those days?
There's a principle in storytelling called habituation. And habituation says the more that you're exposed to a certain thing, the more you have to go out beyond where it was in order to get a reaction. So if you are spending most of your youth watching sitcoms, as I did, or the Marx Brothers, as I did, after a while, you have to make it even more out there, outrageous, more cutting, more sometimes mean-spirited in order to get a laugh. And I think that that's what happens to comedy over a long time, especially when there are so many of them available to the public. And so to me, that's what makes writing comedy harder and harder and harder. And so I tend not to write comedy anymore. The writing that I do tends to be serious or dramatic, as you do. When you were creating Head of the Class, that was in the sort of the heart of the really big movement of lots of sitcoms on TV, correct?
Yeah.
And what was that like in those days? Was it relatively easy to get it produced, or was it very big and difficult to do?
In one sense, there were three channels, maybe four. That was it.
Well, you weren't going to sell Head of the Class to PBS.
No, but would we sell it to Netflix today? Would we sell it to? Well, they rebooted Head of the Class. They brought it back at HBO Max or Warner Brothers, and it was awful. I mean, it was. I don't know if you saw it, but
I did not. Why do you say it was awful? What was it about it that didn't work?
It was not about kids who had a passion for learning and education and with interests. It was about, that was the thing. Head of the Class was about smart kids, but they were really interested in stuff. One was interested in mathematics. One was interested in philosophy. One was interested in current events. One was a Reaganite. There was politics. One was a Reaganite. One was passionately interested in poetry. So they were really smart, but they had these interests. On the new Head of the Class, the reboot, they kept saying how smart they were, but they didn't seem to be interested in anything. So there were no. They were only interested in socialization, and that was part of the thing about Head of the Class. Was they were nerds, and they were outside of the. Even though some of them were really attractive, they were outside of the high school norm in terms of social events, and so they had trouble dating, and they felt freakish. And they had Howard Hessman, who was a teacher, who said, "You're not freaks," and helped them be in the world. The other thing about Head of the Class, the original, was kids could watch it with their parents, because the parents could be interested in the teacher, Howard Hessman, and the kids could be interested in the kids. And on the reboot, they cast the teacher as somebody who was indistinguishable from any of the kids in the class. She looked 16 also, and was just as sort of game and hip and into social media and all of that stuff as they were. And it was empty. And so you had nothing for the adults to relate to. So I'm bitter about it, man.
Well, they cut off a certain amount of royalties for you, I assume.
That's right. Yeah, I'm really, anyway.
You have received over the course of your career many notes from many different people, whether it was from a studio executive, a network executive, a publisher. You've received notes over your whole career. Yeah. What is your best advice for writers in taking notes?
Well, it depends where they're coming from. For instance, what was the best note? In Head of the Class, we had a picture of Malcolm X on the wall.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. This is late 80s. So we get a letter from, a guy calls from ABC and says, "You have to take down the picture of Malcolm X." Why? "It's controversial. Take it down." I said, "I'll be happy to. Just write me a letter telling me to do so." Of course, I never got the letter. And and Malcolm stayed up for the whole 5 years. I wrote a play. The play I wrote, which you very nicely mentioned, was directed by Paul Mazursky. He did not like the ending, and he wanted me to change it. And I said, no. He said, you got it. I said, no, I don't got it, because it's a play. And in plays, the writer, you can't make the writer change it, and so forth. I mean, you can close the play, or you can say, we're going to close, if you don't, but that's Broadway. Anyway, I said, no. If it was a movie, if it was a screenplay, Mazursky would say, I want to change the ending. And if I said no, he said, see you in Westwood, kid, you're fired, get off the set. That's what happens in movies. So and in television, probably, I don't know, I hear from friends that it's open season. There are so many executives, there are so many notes given from agents, from stars managers, stars themselves, from the executives at the studio, all that stuff. I don't know how they deal with them. The only way you deal with them is from a position of power. If you don't have the power, forget it. So, as I was saying to my friend today, there's two good jobs in Hollywood: movie star and director. That's it. Because
and sometimes director's not that good.
No, writer-director is better than director, because you get to you can, and that's why television is so great, because in television, it's a writer's medium.
The writer's the king.
That's right. Because we can all say David Simon wrote The Wire, and David Milch wrote
NYPD Blue.
NYPD, all these things. Tell me the name of a director of those shows.
You can't.
You can't. So television is really great, but screenwriting, it's the first, the director says, I love the script, you're fired. That's it. Happens. Who can we get to rewrite it? Or I will rewrite it. So
it's a part of the business. I frankly have been doing this a long time. I will never understand that part of the business. They'll pay someone $350,000 or $500,000 for a screenplay, and then they'll give it to somebody else to rewrite it.
Yeah. And then they'll give it to somebody else to rewrite it. And somebody, and it becomes like Dickens. It's, the lawsuit that goes on forever. So until every member of the Writers Guild has written on this script. I once arbitrated, the Writers Guild has an arbitration process to see who wrote the script. And there were 20 drafts. And we read all of them. And it turns out that the last draft was pretty much the same as the first draft.
Wow. So they come full circle.
Yeah.
So therefore those writers or writer would then get that credit.
Yeah. And who wrote the screenplay is not a matter of ego. It's a financial matter, because if your name is on the credits, you get residuals and royalties and DVD stuff and whatever it is. So we want that. Every screenplay that I have written has been arbitrated, where, either the star or the director or sometimes the producer wants a credit, or some writer that they hired after us wants a credit. And sometimes they get it. I can give you a list of screenplays I wrote that my name does not appear on. And so most of us can, because we lost the arbitration.
Yeah, that's a really rough thing to go through, is to lose that arbitration, because like you say, it is a financial consideration, not necessarily an ego stroke to lose a credit, though it can be that too.
Yeah.
So let's talk for one moment before we move along about Steve Martin, which you've worked with Steve Martin a number of times, both in his heyday as a stand-up comedian and also on The Jerk, which is a massive success as a feature-length movie. Steve Martin's comedy persona, which is actually a well-honed act, it's not who he is. Am I correct?
Well, depends. I think I have a feeling that Only Murders in the Building is pretty close. That seems to be kind of like Steve Martin.
Who he is.
Yeah, but
when you were writing this back in the day, he had an act that was the wild and crazy guy and all that kind of.
He was not a wild and crazy guy.
Not. And so how helpful is it as a joke writer? Because you're writing mostly jokes, I assume, in those days, not just whole plots. How helpful is it for you to have that known character to write jokes for, as opposed to writing for a character you don't know at all?
Oh, well, it makes a big difference. makes a big difference, because you say, and there are other comedians the same way. For instance, I mean, yes, you had this is Steve's persona on stage. He's and in specials, he's a jerk, and sometimes he's really smart, but he's naive or a naif, all that stuff. So that helps. You can't give him stuff that's outside of that. You couldn't write stuff outside of that. Or take Cosby, for instance, writing for Cosby a lot. Again, the good Bill Cosby. You couldn't write a joke for Bill Cosby that depended on him saying it as you wrote it, because he just wouldn't. He would. So you had to write a situation, and sometimes within an exchange, you had to write that situation and then let him put it in his own words. That were pretty close to what you wrote, but they said you couldn't say, "Hey, Bill, could you make sure you say Buick in the joke?" He would look at you like you were crazy. No, I don't do that.
Because he knows his own abilities better than you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And he knows what works for him to get out of his mouth.
That's
better than you do.
Yeah. He knows his mouth better than I do.
Lucky you, I would say.
Yeah. But then you could take somebody like, maybe Robin Williams, who could do anything. So he must have been fun to write for. I don't know if he wrote all his, I think he wrote most of his material, but, or you could, I wrote with a guy named Pat McCormick, who was, he was my writing partner. And we wrote an act for Carol O'Connor in Las Vegas. I don't remember it, but we wrote jokes.
I didn't know that you wrote with Pat McCormick. He didn't he once put an ad in Variety in which he called himself Gonad the Gargantuan?
I love Pat. He was great. He would have 3 martinis or a bottle of wine at lunch, and he would come back to the office and he would just lie on the floor. He's like 6'8", and he would put his head down on a typewriter. And I said he was the only guy I knew who could fluff up a typewriter.
Well, he was one of Carson's main writers for a long time, wasn't he?
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. Well, I've been having the most wonderful conversation with Michael Elias for a little more than an hour at this point.
Oh.
And we're gonna wind this thing down. And you've worked and met with lots of people in the entertainment industry over a very long period of time. Do you have an oddball, weird, quirky, offbeat, or just plain funny story that you can share with us about through your experiences?
I have this story which I like, which is I was working on a Bill Cosby special and at NBC, and I think next door was Flip Wilson. He was doing his special or his show. Anyway, I'm sitting in the stands watching the rehearsal of a sketch next to Burgess Meredith, who was the guest star on this special. And Burgess Meredith, one of America's greatest actors, Ernie Pyle, Mice and Men. It was just fantastic. And he was on there because he was also the star of The Penguin, right? He played the Penguin.
On the TV series, the Adam West TV series.
So we're watching Bill rehearse the special, and I'm just so thrilled to be sitting next to Burgess Meredith. And Muhammad Ali walks on the stage. And there's like this, it was like a god descendant from the heavens. And he goes over to Bill, and they hug, and they shake hands, whatever, and they chat for a moment, and he walks off. And Burgess Meredith says to me, "Oh my God, that's Muhammad Ali. He's I can't believe I saw Muhammad Ali in person." It was the first time I actually heard stars have heroes too, So I go down to Bill afterwards and I said, "Hey, Bill, Burgess was so excited to see Muhammad Ali. Maybe we can introduce them." And he says, "You do it." I said, "Okay." So I go next door and I find his dressing room in NBC studios, and I knock on the door, and there's Muhammad Ali. Says he's sitting there watching television. He says, "Yeah." I said, "Listen, I'm over there working with Bill Cosby, and Burgess Meredith is on our show, and he would love to meet you." And Muhammad Ali says, "Who's he?" Burgess Meredith, he's a great American actor. He's on Mice and Men, per Story of Ernie Pyle. I said, and he's the Penguin. And Muhammad says, the Penguin? The Penguin wants to meet me? I said, I'll be right back. And I go to Burgess. I said, Burgess, Muhammad Ali wants to meet you. He says, me? I said, yeah, America's greatest actor, Mice and Men, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I said, I take him in, I knock on the door, and Muhammad Ali says, the Penguin. And Burgess says, Muhammad Ali. And he says, you got a picture? And Burgess takes out a picture of him with the cane. And Muhammad Ali says, would you sign it? And Burgess says, do you have a picture of yourself? And Muhammad Ali gets one. And I just left them. That was my story.
Wow. That's very heady stuff.
Yeah.
And really, truly. Okay, well, last question for you today, Michael. Yeah. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to people? I mean, you've already given us tons of great advice today, but do you have one piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those who are maybe starting out in the business, or they're in a little bit and maybe trying to get to the next level?
Raymond Chandler said, if you want to write in Hollywood, make sure you're writing something that is yours, that no one can tell you to change, no one can tell you to fix. It's yours. And then write for money, write for fame, write for that, but make sure, and that thing that you're writing that is yours can be a poem, an essay, a nightmare, a play, but keep that so that you're connected to something, to yourself. The other thing I say is you have to look at movies and television not as an audience anymore, but as a surgeon. How did they do this? If two people meet, how did they meet? And again, that goes back to what I was saying about solving problems. How did they solve this problem? How did they make you like the heroine? How did they make you like the hero? How did they make you hate the villain? And store that and use it and steal it later on, because that's your people. And so that means you have to keep reading and figuring out as you read how people accomplish things, and also take courses and study and read books, read your book. Absolutely. I'm not against, I'm not one of those guys who say, no education. I wish I had some writing courses. It would have made life simpler. So those are the two things. I
would say those are two solid pieces of advice. And I would submit to you that you've done okay without the education. Oh. without the formal education. You've had a lot of education, but a lot of it's your own education, or just as you said earlier, the School of Hard Knocks. Michael, Elias, this has been just so much fun for me and such a terrific hour on StoryBeat, and I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with me today.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was a conversation, right?
That's exactly the idea.
All right, man. Take care.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden. And may all your stories be unforgettable.